Colin Kaepernick, American footballer, refused to stand while the United States national anthem was being played. A brave protest in light of the continued ill treatment of African Americans in the United States. Why doesn't such a protest happen in the United Kingdom? Are UK celebrities just being British and avoid matters of race? Or have they sold out? This week's ORT. Kindred Spirit has raised a topic that she wanted to discuss, which was Colin Kaepernick and the way he's been treated in the United States by the National Football League, the media in general, because there has been some positive feedback, there has been some support within the National Football League. However, he lost his work, and he was generally being seen as some form of terrorist sympathizer for supporting or having some empathy with the Black Lives Matter movement. So, where was you coming from on this?
This just brought up a lot of things for me, but I wanted to just home in on one particular aspect of it, which is, my question isn't about Colin Kaepernick himself, who seems to be a very thoughtful individual who I have no doubt did not do this lightly and considered the possible ramifications of it. It made me question whether or not a protest of that kind would ever take place here amongst our own leading sportsmen and women.
Okay. And your thoughts
and
are?
My thought was I couldn't see it.
Okay.
I couldn't see who amongst our leading sportsmen and women here would lead a charge like that, or even if one person did, whether others would follow. I think there is a cultural difference here.
But there have been riots in the United Kingdom.
There have, but I'm talking about leading sports people, our footballers, or maybe our Olympic athletes who have quite high profile. Would any of them have taken a stand like this and been able to deal with the flack that came with it?
Okay, so can I just come in there?
Ebony, in the studio.
The word that springs to mind for me is purpose. And I think for Colin Kaepernick, he, from what I understand, from what I read and hear, he clearly had a purpose, a reason for making a stand. Without doubt, there are numerous reasons of disaffectedness and inequalities that are served against us as a black nation. But for him, I believe his protest was real focused on the national anthem and the lyrical content and the actual celebration by Francis Scott Key, who wrote the anthem. Who actually, if you look at the lyrics, he regaled in the suffering of black folk who were slaves and so forth, in his belief were distinctly inferior to white folk. And for Colin, who at every stage of playing American football, he clearly, and without, nobody can see it was unreasonable, he clearly had this focus and this purpose and felt very objectional to having to stand and celebrate that and give respect to that. And the expectation was that he completely ignored the content, its real meaning, and continued to stand and respect that. So for me, as I said, I take on what you're both saying and hear what you're saying. And your question, Kindred Spirit, is a really key question. And I think because do our athletes in UK, do they feel like they have a purpose? Do they have a focus? Something that they passionately feel that they need to take a stand or a knee in this respect to. I think that was the key thing for Colin, that he had a purpose. There was a real reason. There was something he was seriously objectional to.
I mean, what comes immediately to mind is that the police in the United Kingdom do not carry firearms.
No.
And there were several shootings of innocent African people, as well as, suffocating others and so forth. And there has been a militarization of the police in America, which is compared to the United Kingdom, they are on steroids out there. I don't know if that makes a difference to the type of response, because quintessentially we are the same people and we have the same kind of thinking on some things. I mean, Obama got the same kind of response here, what he got in America. Muhammad Ali got the same response on the black community, what they got here.
I hear that, but I do think there is a difference in response, and maybe it is to do with the fact that, yes, the police, the majority of them are not armed, but they can still kill you, and they do so on a regular basis. Right? We've had all of these deaths in custody, so in many ways they don't need the guns, because they can still do what they want to do and know that they're not going to get punished for it. So it doesn't lessen I don't think the incidences are any less necessarily, but I just think there's something about the culture in America being able to help people channel their anger, their pain into a particular direction, whereas it doesn't happen over here in the same way.
Well, you say that, but look how many black sports personalities there are, and to be honest, well, not to be honest, but to point out one of the factors in this, Colin Kaepernick is mixed race.
I know that, but I also think,
and he was the first one to do this demonstration,
so
and you've got like thousands upon thousands of black sports personalities, and none of them come out and say, "Look here."
I know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I wonder. I'm just wondering if is it just that there's a Britishness to the way it is done, and here in the UK, the protests are done, but in perhaps a much quieter way, and to some extent, possibly even scripted for us. And I think about the kick out racism in football. I'm not entirely sure how that came about, but that's almost scripted. There's almost a template for how that should be tackled, racism in football. It's welcomed. I'm not sure to what extent it's effective, and where it actually the grassroots came from, and the involvement or the experiences of black players, where that came into play. But it feels like it's, perhaps there are protests or stands, but done in a quieter British way. And as I said, it just perhaps seems a bit scripted.
But it's just the very fact that anyone at all, and mixed race or not, I get that, but anyone at all, I just don't I think that
go ahead.
The sports, our black sportsmen and women here, or our mixed race sportsmen and women, have a very different perspective on all of this, and I don't
Which is this is your unresearched point, by the way.
Unresearched point. This is purely the opinion is my own and not my host's. But my view is that they are a lot more establishment oriented than many are over the pond, and they don't, because the
So what do you base that on?
I basically, if you look at how, I don't see anybody really raising their head above the parapet in relation to anything. Rio Ferdinand springs to mind in relation to some issues, but I don't see any others who really step up.
So what did Rio Ferdinand speak about?
He has spoken up about, he has done some speaking up about Black Lives Matter, and he was quite vocal around things like Stephen Lawrence and some of the deaths in custody. He's the only one.
And am I correct in thinking that he's also mixed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what the mixed element bring, whether
I
there's...
think it's an interesting dynamic.
Yes.
But it just makes me think, what is it? Our sportsmen and women here are not vocal on things outside of their own sport.
Yeah.
They might talk about an element of racism within their own sport that they're challenging collectively, but outside of that, the stuff that the rest of us have to do in the real world, they are very quiet on.
Well, I'm not sure about that. And yes, I hear that this is your unresearched opinion, but I'm not sure. I mean, because vocality doesn't always, or isn't always, audible. And what I mean by that, Colin Kaepernick, for example, we perhaps wouldn't have heard so much about him on the level that we are now if he hadn't decided to take the stand. However, if we actually look at and research him, there are numerous charities and charitable works in regards to uplifting and improving outcomes for the community that he's been part of, and that's he's initiated and done a lot of work around that. But that was all done quite quietly. I mean, it was his, it was something that he focused on and he did, but we didn't know about it. So we could easily have said, well, this is the only thing he's done, or we could assume that, our British athletes, they're not doing anything because, they're very quiet about it. But as I said, vocality doesn't, or action doesn't have to be, and isn't always audible. So perhaps they are doing more than we realise, I would suggest.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the relationship between the environment and the mind, you have the American environment and the British environment.
Yeah.
What do you think is the difference there?
I think it's a lot of things. I think the fact that the police carry guns over there has a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think over here, and I'm not saying they don't do it over there, but I think over here we don't have an equivalent of this thing called the American dream that they buy into.
Yeah.
Over here, you're either accepted by the establishment or you're not. And once you are, there is an invisible line that you are expected to toe. And once you step into that world, you don't look back. So you leave your neighbourhood. The only other black people you probably see on a regular basis is maybe your teammates or your family.
Yeah.
You completely remove yourself from that world and all of the experiences and issues that are going on in that world.
Yeah.
You don't take it on.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, even though it happens in the same way up to a point, yes, they do leave their neighbourhoods and go and live in wealthier parts, but there is still a tendency amongst them to put something back. So they do tend to fund charities.
But why?
Because it's what you do. You have to be seen to be giving back, but that in some ways keeps some of them connected with a grassroots experience.
So I would agree with you, but I also think that slaves take on the mentality of their slave masters.
Yeah, agree.
And I was just wondering what your view is then on the difference between the dominant Europeans in America versus the dominant Europeans in the United Kingdom in terms of how do they pathologize race.
I think what happens in America is, I think that a lot of blacks believe they can buy their way out of it. So the whole American dream thing is, if I can get enough money and move out of this area and surround myself with the trappings of success, then these bad elements are not going to reach me. I'm going to be able to insulate myself and my family. And yes, I will give back to charity and be seen to be doing that. But this is how you get out of it. And that's the message to Americans generally.
Yeah.
You get enough money and you can insulate yourself against life's harsh realities. Over here, I think there's a class system in place that adds quite an interesting dynamic.
Okay.
So even though you will have some blacks who are quite successful in sort of sport and entertainment and areas like that, there is still a kind of, there's a barrier that they're still not going to get past.
Right.
I take your point about environment, and it's really important and really quite significant. If I give an example, for example, Colin Kaepernick, I'm sure he's very clear and understands fully his environment, the environment within which he works, and the attitudes towards the black African nation as such, and the opportunities available to them. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't aware of Craig Hodges, who experienced 25 years ago exactly the experience that he's having now. He was a very skilled, sought-after player in the 1990s. He was outspoken, about a number of issues, ranging from poverty in the black community in Chicago, the Gulf War, etc. And he had some vehement oppositions to these things. And after one of the championships, he, I believe, he showed up in the club's customary White House congregation ceremony in full-length dashiki and with an 8-page letter. And needless to say, he was cut by the Bulls, and his career pretty much ended with the NBA. He played international football and so forth, but never to the levels that he had played before. He was essentially blackballed, as is Colin now. And the point I'm making is Colin would have been fully aware of all of that and, the risks he would be seemingly taking. But he was prepared to do that, to take the knee, to make the point, to take a stand and be objectional to the attitudes. So your question again, Kindred Spirit, is really quite poignant, because we have to ask, how many, if any, who of our British athletes would be prepared to take, such a decisive action?
Okay, thank you. All right, let me pose a different question. Do you think that America is more overtly racist?
I think they're more overtly racist, whereas over here it's all institutionalised and a lot more subtle, which makes it very difficult for a lot of blacks living here to even recognise that it's going on.
And this is what I'm trying to pull out in terms of, does the environment have an influence in how people understand race, and therefore they're less likely to take a strong stance?
I think it's that, but I think in America as well, you also have rule by the gun, don't you?
Yeah.
And that is how you resolve. So even though you will have your Colin Kaepernicks who will take a stand like that, you've also got your Micah Jacksons who will just go on top of a building and shoot down, policemen. So you've got that element of it as well. Well, I'll just get a gun and shoot them back, kind of thing. And there isn't that equivalent over here. What you will get is, yes, I'll get a gun, but I'll go and shoot down 5 people in my own neighbourhood instead.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in America, because it clearly does.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen there is not going to be any black person here who gets a gun and shoots down 11 white policemen. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
However, what I'm trying to establish is this thing about race in the United Kingdom. Does it become like a personal pursuit if your life doesn't depend on it? So, for instance, in America, there are no-go areas for certain people of a certain color. So race becomes more of a daily issue.
Yeah.
You can have a president, as they do have now, who is clearly preoccupied by race. They don't speak like that in the United Kingdom. So in some ways, if your slave masters are communicating race through a particular type of, like you said, sophisticated language, then couldn't you be forgiven to think, well, it's not really about race, it's actually about work ethic and personal agency, as opposed to actually, even if I have a $10 billion, I'm still not good enough.
Yeah, because I think what they very skillfully did here during probably started in the mid-90s maybe, was there is this massive drive towards this thing called multiculturalism. Yeah. What they call the illusion of inclusion.
Yeah, I think it started earlier actually, in the 70s, yeah.
And so you can be mistaken for thinking, well, what racism? It's all right now, isn't it?
Yeah. We've had the growth in kind of mixed relationships. I think one of the biggest growing demographics
on TV now and all of that. So you can, if you judge it purely on the superficial, but you can be forgiven for thinking, well, what is the problem?
And race is often in the United Kingdom a private issue. Yeah. People in their living rooms, maybe on their social media will talk about it, but in the workplace, we don't even have a radio show or a talk show where race is discussed openly from a black perspective in the United Kingdom. We don't have any prominent educated figures in universities who are writing books on the matter, who are speaking publicly about it. We've had people like Stuart Hall who have talked about identity and so forth, but I'm saying, like, no, Mark Duggan, there's been nobody who's come out with any position, any qualified, educated position, speaking out about the race element in these killings of young black men.
I think we need to remember also that psychology has much to do with how we deal with or not deal with racism. For example, in the workplace, we know that there is a real imbalance in terms of cultural imbalance, in terms of senior members of staff, management and so forth. And that's very, very apparent in the workplace. But I think maybe in some instances, we are pacified by the token black manager and perhaps get comfortable in thinking that, there'll be others coming on. There is a black manager, so things, as you said, things are changing or things are different, because I think those are psychological moves. Because we've all worked in an environment, I think, where we see promotions are made on a mate's basis as opposed to merit. And very often there's again a cultural imbalance there, and every so often we see we're given a pacifier, and there's a mood of dissatisfaction and so forth, when it becomes very apparent, even though we do know the underlying feeling of what actually is happening, and we get a pacifier. I think the media also, I believe, have a part to play in the psychology of this all. And to pick up on your point in regards to Mark Duggan, the media portrayal of him was entirely, and certainly predominantly, about his criminal background and so forth. There was little focus on the possible illegalities of how he was pursued and shot down. And the predominant negative portrayal of him, I think, would make it difficult for some in the community to speak up for him and make a stand and have a protest to support somebody who was portrayed to us as being a drug-dealing criminal and outside of the values of the black community.
It's a slightly different point. Look, we have, for instance, joint enterprise where a group of young black men can go to prison for 18, 20 years for an association.
Yeah.
No proof. And no one's come out. So I'm saying, is the absence of a kind of crude form of racism from the Europeans, because don't forget, when we had the riots in the United Kingdom, what you also had preceding that was the chants from the National Front.
True.
Calling your wogs, niggas, go home, which is still very much present.
Yes,
and in terms of the alt-right in the United States.
Yeah.
Then you have the George Zimmerman shooting and so forth, this idea that you can kill black people. I'm saying, is there a connection between the overtness or the subtlety of how race is perpetrated by the dominant culture and the lack of push from the black community in the United Kingdom?
I think that's exactly it. Actually, I think that's exactly the problem. And it is very easy to, you look across at America and you think, oh, thank God I don't live over there.
Yeah, I don't want to go there for a holiday. Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
Oh, they're going to shoot me as we step off a plane. Yeah.
And it's exactly this thing that we were discussing before in relation to this student in college, where you miss the subtleties and you miss actually what's going on right there in front of you because you've forgotten, you've become sensitized. Desensitized.
Yeah, you've acclimatized.
And that is in many ways more dangerous. Yeah. Because if you're not picking up on it, you can't arm yourself, you can't actually prepare yourself for it. And I think that's the worry. Yeah. So you have these very successful, if you just focus on sports people for a moment, they are successful, they've got their money, they've got their nice house, and they've moved away, so I'm safe.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, John,
I don't have to worry about that.
they have a drive in football to get rid of, give racism the red card, get rid of racism. Now, John Barnes made a really good point. He said, don't put the onus on football to get rid of racism when racism is in society. Now, I would follow on that point by saying, is it fair to look for a certain type of response within sports when actually there is a very little response within the community?
Yeah, that's a fair point, yeah.
That the community isn't articulating their upset generally.
You know, I understand that, but I suppose it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? Do you sometimes need leading figures to step up and then you join the campaign, or do you need a more grassroots campaign and then they lend their, their face and their voice to it?
Yes, no, absolutely. But I would add to that, and I think I will be in keeping with Mr. Barnes, because I think we need to remember and first of all not be fooled into or make ourselves believe that we need a prominent figure to make a protest, or I think we have to remember that we're actually all leaders, and furthermore remember that we are here because of grassroots campaigning, initially by the slaves.
I don't know which way is more effective sometimes.
Well, I mean, we're in the Marcus Garvey Library here in Tottenham discussing this topic, and over the years I've had to wonder how many children have been taught about Marcus Garvey at their homes.
That's true. That's a very good point.
So, on the back of this, Colin Kaepernick issue, what is the thing that you would want to change or approach differently as a result of this discussion and your growing awareness on it?
It's a difficult one because what it's done is it's left me with more questions than answers, though this conversation has been very helpful in kind of filtering some of that. But it just makes me wonder where the fight's gone over here.
Right.
What is it going to take to galvanise us?
Yeah.
Because it's so crude over there that you have to have a response of one kind or another.
Yeah.
But if that's not there, what is it? What is the thing that's going to ignite over here? And what's my role in that?
Yeah.
But for me, I think in my future discussions and reasonings, I'll make more of a conscious effort to remind that we are all leaders, and we don't actually need to, subscribe to the myth that we need a prominent figure to lead the way in protest.
Well, as for me, I think that one thing I'll be doing is, especially through social media, is pushing good books that talk about race, that talk about our origins. So yes, Kindred Spirit, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to Ebony in the studio car.
Included below are links referring to this topic. And remember, comment, share and subscribe. And always, talk the thing. Organize, sit down, reason and talk.